Cruz versus Vera, yada, yada, yada. The rest of the card was fine. I wasn't like super pumped about this card. I'm a big fan of Marlon Chito Vera, and I am an anti-fan of Dominick Cruz. Like, I don't like Dominick Cruz, but he's a star. He's a legend. I watch him fight, and I like watching him fight, though I've never rooted for Dominick Cruz, I don't think, ever.
Dominick Cruz is one of these guys, which happens a lot in MMA, for me at least, where the guys who you weren't necessarily rooting for, as they get older, you start rooting for them out of almost like a nostalgia, like fucking. And I remember this with a lot of guys.
Tito Ortiz,
Matt Hughes, a lot of guys like this who I used to root for to lose.
Yeah.
As they got older, you just find yourself almost like fucking rooting for them. And Dominick Cruz is a guy who he just became kind of impossible to hate. After a while, he had he was the guy in that division and lost almost his entire prime to injuries.
Yeah.
He was injured
He was off for like 4 years at one point or something. Crazy.
It was like years
Maybe
off.
Not that long, but
it was years off, then came back for one comeback fight,
years,
then got
then 2 years
another
again.
2 years, And these were years where he was the best guy in the division, and then it was pretty impressive that he came all the way back and got his title back. And then I got to say, his last fight before this one, he looked great. He got dropped and then came back and won the next 2 rounds.
He looked pretty good in this fight.
He looked good. He was competitive in this fight.
Yeah,
he did get dropped twice early, and then he ended up taking
a lot of people are saying that he
kick.
won those first 2 rounds, but I think if you get dropped and it's like he wasn't really landing flush.
No,
with anything
he
himself.
lost. He lost the rounds.
I think he was losing the rounds.
The getting dropped was more, noteworthy than the stuff he was doing. But he was competitive in the fights, and he did recover very well from getting dropped both those times. But then, Vera is a guy who's really been coming into his own lately. Cruz is a guy who's probably toward the end of his career. And Vera has found a way. Look, Frankie Edgar was very in that fight with Marlon Vera.
Yeah.
But Vera has been finding a way to land those big
Chito's
shots.
got like really, really high fight IQ. I know he trains with Jason Perillo, who, Bisping credited Perillo for like changing the way that he thought.
Yeah.
Right? Changing like a mentor role. And I think you're watching Marlon Chito Vera just evolve before our very eyes. He looks like a better version of himself in each fight. He's also extremely dangerous, dude. I think that he has the record now for the most finishes in the bantamweight division.
Is that true?
Yeah, he's just a killer, dude. And he's a guy he's always looking for a finish. Is this the finishing sequence? Yeah, dude. Bang. Ooh. Right in the nose. Broke his nose with that shot.
It just landed perfect.
Landed perfect. He set it up perfectly, Tried to set up a similar shot earlier on in the fight. Chito Vera throws head kicks.
Well, what happened there, too, is, Dominick Cruz kind of like invented this fight style, which was a really interesting thing about Dominick Cruz as a fighter. There was really no one else who really fought like him. He invented this style of like doing all this crazy, like really relying on crazy footwork and wild movement. And it gave a lot of guys fits. But if you can time it, he leaves himself big openings.
He's a dude who's nearly impossible to hit, but you have to be your fight IQ has to be that high. Like Dominick Cruz, I think the rest of the sport sort of caught up to him a little bit in terms of how smart, especially at 135. This division's sort of exploded at this point. There's so many fucking killers at 135. Whereas like Dominick, I think had sort of head and shoulders above fight IQ.
Well, he had very good wrestling. And then he was like doing this crazy, like, dancing all over the place footwork. And it was very hard for guys to time. When is he coming in? When is he not coming in? You're ready for the takedown. You're ready for all this. But if you watch this knockout again, what happens is Dominick Cruz is stepping out to the outside and Chito Vera knows, like he guesses right on what he's doing. And so as he steps out, he steps right into the kick.
Yeah, well, he set it up. He set it up with the hook. Like, I watched a breakdown on this. Shout out the Weasel, who does the best breakdowns on all these.
He's great.
But he was setting him up with the hook, right? So Dominick was circling away from the power shot, and he did that a few times, and then he just waited for the moment, and he caught him with it.
And that's what Chito Vera's been doing lately in his fights. He did that with Frankie Edgar, too, where he's kind of doing this thing, which you can see, which is really high-level MMA fighting, where he's kind of, people will say, like, certain guys get off to a slow start. And people say this about a lot of really high-level fighters. They're a slow starter. But what they're really doing is kind of like taking in data.
They're computing.
They're seeing.
Yeah,
okay,
John Jones does this.
John Jones does this. Anderson Silva
is the in my opinion the number one example of somebody who's not slow starting. he's computing you, figuring you out, and then he comes out and he fucking just decimates you.
Well, if you remember, even in his prime, Anderson Silva used to do this all the time. He'd start fights and he would start dancing around you and throwing a lot of feints. And like he'd kind of like see how you react to every single feint. And then in like the second round, he'd be doing the ninja Anderson Silva thing where he's dodging everything you throw and knowing exactly where you're going. But it's because he kind of figured out like where you're moving off every feint and then how he can lure you into his big shots. And that to me seems to be a similar thing to what Vera's doing here with the Frankie Edgar fight. With this, he's kind of in the fight and seeing how you're moving and reacting to his shots and then setting you up for that fucking perfect shot.
Killer shot. Yeah.
You know?